Hello and welcome back to The Beth Effect. I am your host, Beth Clifford. It's been a busy couple weeks for me, traveling to Arizona for my corporate job, but then also I had a lumpectomy on my ab wall, which was supposed to be a routine procedure, but we had some hematoma situation there, which is blood clotting, twice in the incision zone. So I ended up having a very busy day in and out of surgery 3 times that day. And thanks to Elevation, my sponsor for the Beth Effect, for their supplements and peptide protocols, that I called them and let them know that this was happening. And they helped provide some supplements that speed up recovery and gave me some great tips to help kind of ease the discomfort throughout that transition. So a big thank you to them, and thank you for being the Beth Effect's sponsor. So I'm going to jump into today's topic with you guys. And honestly, it kind of came about. I was having a chin wag with one of my friends, one of my best friends, and she had watched the new adaptation of The Lion King, Mufasa, with her kids. And I had been to see it with my kids like a couple months ago. So we were talking about it, chit-chatting. And she had said, you know, gosh, like no wonder Scar ended up the way that he did, because look at his upbringing, look at his childhood. His dad was a jerk. He never felt good enough. His mom loved Mufasa more. And she was saying how it just made her sad. And it also helped her sympathize with Scar. No wonder Scar ended up that way. And she's right. But then on the flip side of that, if you've watched it, it's the backstory of like when Scar and Mufasa were little cubs and their story. But then you look at Mufasa's story, and he was abandoned. He lost his parents. He was abandoned. The male lions of the pride hated him. The only person who spent any time with him was the lioness, the mother. And so you could equally sit there and say that Mufasa also had every reason under the planet to turn out to be a bit of a knobhead. And yet he didn't. He chose to take his circumstance and turn it into him being essentially a hero. And Scar took his circumstance and allowed that to turn him into being the villain. And it was just interesting as we were looking at, our chat that was supposed to be kind of light-headed or like light in general, turned quite heavy, as I was like, I mean, there's a flip side of every coin. And if you look at almost all of these fairy tales or stories that we read when we were little, even now as we watch as adults, no one is born a villain and no one is born a hero. Each time there's a villain or a hero in a circumstance or story, it's because they've taken their situation and it's how they've decided to react to it that has determined then where they go. And so really the key, there's some key differences for childhood, right? Like the villain is defined by their challenges while the hero uses those challenges to grow. And we take that now and you look at it from like an adult standpoint, more realistic. You know, we're not superheroes, we're not lions, but like putting it into like, how is this relevant in our life and what are some similarities that we see day to day? And I really kind of look at it as far as like the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset with people. So as I was like researching this and kind of like organizing my notes, like think about this. Usually when we have a fixed mindset or we meet people with a fixed mindset, it really comes from like a place of fear and scarcity. So someone else's success, if you ever had this or felt this yourself, when someone else shares their success about something, it creates this feeling of like they're robbing you of success that could be yours. Like in the world, there's a bucket of success, and if someone else has a win, therefore it's robbing what could be yours. And I feel like sometimes I've had moments in my life where I felt this, but I also see this in adults where it's just like someone else is successful. And it's interesting how many people aren't genuinely happy for their success, because in their mindset, they come from a place of fear and scarcity, where they think that there's not enough success to go around, and somehow it makes them feel less than or worried or less in control. And really that fixed mindset is this need to control. It's this feeling of like, I want to force decisions of those around me by taking away their choice. And I see this, I've experienced this, but I see this with people where you even look at the villains, like in stories, and they want to take away your choice so that you're forced to behave a certain way, and it helps them not feel so scared or not feel so out of control. And we sometimes see this with parenting, where we are like so scared that our kids will make wrong decisions that we want to remove all free will of choice. Now, obviously there's like a fine line to that, but you even see it with like parents of adult children, where you're like, okay, but they at some point they need to be able to go and make their own choices, but the parents have such a hard time relinquishing control to their young adult children, where they're just like, no, I want to be able to control their choices. I want to be able to force their decisions. And it usually comes from a place of fear or a place of scarcity. And then on the opposite side of that, you've got the growth mindset. And that is the mindset of like, where you're really turning the obstacles into opportunities, personal growth and progress. So it's the shift that happens in the brain, where it's, you know, what's the worst that could happen to what's the best that could happen. And that abundance mindset, when like this person wins, we all win. And how amazing for them that they're winning, and let me cheer them on and support them, because it's really, one, because you just genuinely care, and you actually find joy and fulfillment when others win. And then secondly, you don't worry about it robbing you of your success, because there's that mindset of the rising tide rises all ships. So you train people underneath you, and you're not nervous. You're not that manager that's worried that if you hire people more talented than you, or you train them to be more talented than you, that they're going to one day surpass you. When really, if you're an amazing manager, that's what you want. Like you should be thrilled when people are outperforming you, doing better, more talented than you. Really, that's the abundance mindset, was like the more talent the better, instead of the nervousness or that worry that like if they're too good or they're too talented, they could take something away from me and rob me of something. You also, in the growth mindset or abundance mindset, you empower others to lean into their own choices. So there again, you mentor, you teach, you show, you don't safeguard your secrets, you share, you show, and then you empower them to move forward and make their own choices, and applaud them along and support them along. And then you take disciplined action. So you really focus on the responsibility of your own choices. It's when I look at kind of like the growth versus the fixed mindset, it really kind of is more of that, like that victim mentality versus that abundance mentality. There is nothing more frustrating than being around someone that is the victim of their own decisions or their own circumstances, and they are constantly complaining. And I think most of the time when I look at people that have a fixed mindset in life, they're usually friends and around people who also have that same fixed mindset, that victim mentality, that I don't want to say villain mentality, but it's almost like that victim mentality, or I've seen it. Like I've seen it as an adult. For example, I've sat at dinners before where someone moves into a new house and people start being like, well, how do they afford it? Well, I don't think that, I think they're going to be house poor. And instead of being like, good for them, that's amazing, people start picking it apart. Like, it can't be that they can afford this house. It can't be that they've moved out of our neighborhood into something better. Like, let's find a way to justify how this is not a good thing. I once sat at a dinner where a name was brought up about a family that had moved out of state. And since they had moved out of state, their business had skyrocketed. They had become really successful, worth multiple millions a year. And when that family was brought up at the table, the conversation was, well, of course they had to move out of state. They couldn't make it in this state. So they had to move out of state to be successful. And it's just, I remember sitting there thinking, well, gosh, they're still worth more than all of us at this table. That's amazing for them. Like whether they did it in this state or they did it on the moon, who cares? But it is, you notice that there tends to be a shift. People with abundance mindset have a really hard time being around the victims, being around a fixed mindset mentality. They tend to separate out. And when you have an abundance growth mindset, you get really exhausted when you're around people that are constantly the victims, constantly fixed mindset, constantly in a state of worry or control, or they're just genuinely not happy for others. So really, when you the beautiful thing about this and being aware of this as an adult is you actually have a decision and a choice every single day on how you handle things that fall on your lap or different circumstances to change that. So if you feel like, oh man, maybe I have been in a bit of a fixed mindset, you have the ability to change that by the little decisions that you make. And if you're on the path of a growth mindset, you have decisions and you can continue along that. And it's really, number one is paying attention to who you're around. Number two is paying attention to what you talk about when you're around those people. But really, it's mainly kind of changing the brain and the way the brain thinks. And it's not just that you can get into a growth mindset and then you stay there consistently. It's something that you are constantly having to pay attention to. And I'm going to share a really vulnerable story about this because, again, I feel like I do this podcast mainly for me because every time I start researching and start talking about a subject, I have these huge aha moments personally. And I'm just going to share that with you just so that I'm not here lecturing you saying like, I've got this figured out. I don't. But I will say that I have always, as an adult, really prided myself on having maybe not even like a growth mindset, but I've been like anti-victim mindset. Like my whole life, I've really prided myself on not being the victim and working through circumstances. We moved to the States when I was a young teenager with my family, and I hated it and it was awful at the time. And instead of being the victim and using that to stay put in the house, I went out and made friends and had a great experience. Then, in really young adulthood, my dad left and abandoned our family, went to the Philippines on a work trip and never came back for a second family he had there. And again, probably a situation that would have been really easy for me to lean into a victim mentality and allow that to really shape who I was moving forward. But really prided myself on moving through it, making it a positive, moving on with life, having key takeaways. Then it's no secret, Brad and I got married young, we got divorced young. And again, so here I am in a foreign country, dad abandoned me, early divorce. I mean, I feel like that if I had gone off the rails at this point in life, I would have had every excuse to hate men, to not trust anyone, to hate life, and really just turn inward and be really fixed mindset. And again, I didn't. And I'm so grateful because 37-year-old Beth wouldn't be who she is today without any of those challenges. But having said that, there was a circumstance for me about 2 years ago on a company trip. So it was a company awards trip. And one of my co-workers' husband, I want to say sexually harassed. It was almost like sexually harassed / sexually assaulted me at the bar one night. And there were witnesses and people saw, but it was like so shocking because my husband and I both knew this couple for a couple years before this happened, like personally. And it really shook me up. And luckily, there were witnesses, HR was aware of it. From a company standpoint, I didn't file any claims. So I feel like my company was like, okay, like no issues here. So I didn't really get any support through the situation, but I also was so embarrassed and humiliated by it that I kind of just went inward and tried to deal with it like I always do, where I was like, okay, I'm not the victim. I'm going to, I started having night terrors that would keep me up at night, where I would have vivid dreams of being strangled or being attacked from behind. And I honestly lost a lot of weight, lost a lot of hair. It was really bad personally for about 6 months. And then I decided to start taking action, and I wasn't going to be fair mindset. And I worked through it. I took self-defense. I started taking jujitsu. I did all the things where I felt like I was, it no longer affected me. But here's the thing. And it didn't. And I'm really proud of that. But here's the thing. Nothing happened to this couple, meaning the man who did it or the wife that accused me of lying and tried to get me fired from my job. Nothing happened to them. And although I took control of myself, I found that I was just so upset that I didn't feel like they had any repercussions. Like here I was losing sleep, losing weight, unable to make it through the night sometimes without a panic attack. And yet nothing, there seemed to be no repercussions there for them. And it, I started to become a victim mindset on that. I wish I could say that I would take the high road, but I didn't. And I just felt like, to those that were close enough to me that knew about it, I couldn't stop talking about it. I was so angry. I was so upset. Even if their names ever came up, I would just it was I wanted them to either be publicly humiliated or to suffer in the way that I felt I had for 2 years. And I can confidently say that I definitely suffered in ways in this situation, which was not my fault. I hadn't done anything wrong. And I just felt why am I dealing with this? And they got away scot-free. And it started to change a piece of my personality. And in studying this and really leaning into this, it's I could feel people start to get sick of me bringing it up. Those that I would talk to about it and felt safe enough talking to it, I could tell that it was okay, Beth, it's almost been 2 years. Maybe let's move on from this. And it was this aha moment when I really was looking into this podcast and just the villain mindset versus the hero mindset. The villain becomes so consumed with revenge and vengeance for what happened to them that they turn into a really ugly version of themselves. And although I don't feel like it got to that point, I didn't like the side of me that what I thought and what I felt when this situation's ever brought up or when people talked about it. Whereas the hero takes the situation, and although I feel like I addressed it for myself, I hadn't fully let go. And I now it's almost like something snapped when I was writing out this podcast and thinking about, okay, what are some things that people can do? And here's this aha moment I had as far as Mufasa and bloody Scar. But the reality is that although for someone who's prided themselves on being abundance and growth mindset, there was still this circumstance in my life that I wasn't. And it felt like an anchor, not to sound cheesy, but in my heart, there was a piece of me that still was just was festering on this awful situation that happened. And at the end of the day, after going through this, I just felt so liberated when I had the realization that I have to live with what happened, and so do they. And whether or not they lose no sleep over it, that's not my problem. And I can look to I'm free, and it could have been a lot worse. And there are people out there that have experienced a lot worse. And what I have taken away from it is that now I have this incredible empathy for survivors of sexual abuse and sexual assault and harassment. And I now am so strict with my girls on they have self-defense jiu-jitsu training, but also I have a husband and a son in my house, and my husband's self-awareness of like things that he sees around him that now maybe he would have turned a blind eye or thought that he was like, if he saw a male kind of acting out of line, that he'd be like, oh, it's none of my business. Now he feels an extra responsibility to look out for the women in his life and the women in his surroundings, and that I will raise a son that will be so respectful and careful of the women in his life and those around him too. And a huge advocate for this community of women that are sufferers and are working through it. And I would never have had that if I hadn't. Luckily for me, I hadn't had any previous experience in this in my life. And not that I wasn't empathetic to it when I would hear about it, but now I feel so protective and passionate about this area of society that beforehand I wouldn't have had. And so that need for vengeance and revenge wasn't hurting anyone else but me in the situation. And if I really look back now, I'm not grateful for it. I wish it had never happened. But it's also, just like all the other things that have happened in my life, truly changed and shaped a version of me that wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that. And that I can be grateful for. And that I can look at in the growth and abundance mindset and the hero mindset of, how can I take this now and go use the knowledge that I have because of this experience for good? And that never would have been there before. And I also can be honest that it would have taken me probably years to get there if I hadn't done the research for this podcast. So I always love to do takeaways for you guys when I'm like, okay, here's this thing that I'm seeing and let's talk about it. And here are some key things to take away. But this week's one really hit me hard because it's very close to home, and I was living it. And so my point of sharing the story just so openly with you guys is you can primarily feel like you're in a fixed mindset and change that with one decision of how you decide to behave moving forward. And you can be in a growth mindset and still maybe have some situations that you're holding on to that you're like, I'm not fully proud of how I'm handling this. And the beautiful thing is that your decisions determine your destiny here. Like, you can decide literally today to change that, and that change will start the trajectory of new muscle memory and new habits, because that victim mentality is kind of like the death of 1,000 paper clips or paper cuts, not paper clips. It's like a death of 1,000 paper cuts, because it's little things. Like, you can be that person, and I've seen these people where they're just constantly unhappy for others, can't find the good in them, like love to talk about the worst things that are going on, love to pull people down when they're winning. But then when something good happens in their life and they're looking around for the cheerleaders and they're like, why aren't people being happy for me? Where are the people standing up to clap for me? And it's like, there's no one left to clap for you, because you spent your entire life creating a narrative and surrounded yourself with people that only want to pull you down, because it's like the crab in the bucket situation. So big takeaways of today's podcast is it is easy to turn around from being the victim, because it's your decisions. You can literally decide today. Usually the fixed mindset people sit together and the growth mindset people sit together. So pay attention to who you're spending your time with and what you're talking about. You are going to be faced with circumstances out of your control for the rest of your life. Every single person, once they hit adulthood, could turn around and say, I have every excuse to be the hero in my story. And everyone could turn around and say, I have every excuse to be the victim, because everyone is hit in some way with hardships, whether by their own decisions or by the decisions of others. And you have the choice. Like, you can decide how your story decides to play out. I always say, like, life's too short. Like, as long as you are breathing, you can change this. And I can promise you that for me, when I've let go of the control and of the fear and of the scarcity mindset, or even just like the revenge mindset, I feel infinitely better. And I'm just happier. And it has been a really key stage to my healing journey of all the different circumstances in my life. So if I can do it, because there's no one more stubborn than me, I promise you can do it too. So there we go. That's it. That's all I've got banging on about this subject today. Thank you guys so much for listening along to this episode of The Beth Effect. I'll be back next week for a good chin wag. Please don't forget to hit the like or subscribe button. If you enjoyed this, please share with other people that you feel like would benefit or would enjoy it, and follow at the Beth Clifford on Instagram or TikTok, not TikToks. Follow at Beth Clifford on Instagram or TikTok for more behind the scenes of my life day to day. I will be back next week for another episode, so I'll see you then.